Welcome to This Morning on Asakhe podcast, your daily dose of insightful conversation on current affairs, politics, and social issues. Please share and also follow us on social media at SiteZW. Now, stay tuned to today's episode.
A very good morning to you and welcome to This Morning on Asakhe. My name is Nonhlanhla Mapigwa and of course I'm here with Brighton. Good morning.
A very good morning to you, Mapigwa, this morning. Good morning to you, all of you guys joining us this morning. Zimbabwe-China relations. We look at influence of China on Africa, and our guest this morning is Dr. Malinga, coming from PRIZ. That's the Public Policy Research Institute of Zimbabwe. Is the Senior Research and Policy Manager. Good morning to you, Dr. Malinga.
Good morning, Brighton. In terms of the China in Africa program, we are currently looking at the Sino-Africa relations or the China-Africa relations. Globally, there is now the emergence of this new superpower, which is China. But however, for it to get to the stage where it is, there has been a lot that has been done in terms of building China's influence, in terms of ensuring it becomes a global superpower, in terms of its investments in various sectors such as technology, and also in terms of the bilateral relations that it has created with a number of African countries. If you look at the African continent at the present moment, I think China has got bilateral relations with almost 52 out of the 55 countries. So already by looking at such a scenario, it shows how China has grown exponentially in terms of its economic prowess and also in terms of ensuring that it establishes a lot of relations. So in a majority of African countries, China has been seen as an all-weather friend. These are part of the debate and the discourse that we have, that why are African countries actually having relationships with China at the expense of the West? So there is always this contentious understanding that China does not offer these stringent conditions that the West offers. We're finding that there are pockets of uniqueness in terms of the interest of China. For example, China, when we look at China with South Africa, there tends to be a party-to-party relation that exists between the Communist Party and also the ANC. China is also interested in the media space in South Africa. And China is also interested in the manufacturing sector in South Africa. And then when we're looking at the context of Zambia, China is also heavily involved in the media space, and China is also part and parcel of big companies that are actually engaged in mining activities. And even when we also look at Zambia started this relationship with China soon after the declaration of the UDI by Ian Smith, where Northern and Southern Rhodesia were divided, Southern Rhodesia being Zimbabwe, Northern Rhodesia being Zambia. And in our own context here in Zimbabwe, we're seeing how China is also stemmed authority, especially when it comes to natural resources in the form of mining. I think it's the biggest miner in terms of lithium in the country. And we're seeing over time that 90% of mining activities are actually in the hands of China at the present moment. And we have also seen how China has established party-to-party relationships with also former liberation movements. I also wanted to give you an analogy of B, that there are two key issues that we can be able to identify there in terms of the China-Africa relations. One, the bee brings honey, and that honey is in terms of infrastructural development, it is in the terms of the borrowing that China is offering to a majority of African countries, the technology, the advancements, the so-called development that China is bringing. That is the honey that we're talking about in this analogy. But at the same time, a bee stings. That sting now is whether these so-called gifts and the development that we're getting from China, does it not have consequences and repercussions, especially where there is a debt trap? I think in recent times, we can use Zambia as a case where China has actually used its influence and also its economic prowess and power to be able to ensure that Zambia is in debt. And at the present moment, Zambia is trying to get itself out of that particular debt. If we are to talk about major technologies, we also need to look at how some of the so-called advanced technologies are actually surveillance mechanisms when it comes to ordinary citizens, and African countries are taking that to their advantage. And in our own context here in Zimbabwe, we also need to ask that particular question, as we are seeing how some of the activities by China have led to the displacement of people, especially in communities that have got natural resources such as platinum, such as lithium.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Malinga, for that. What are some of these factors that influence these relations between two countries in the context of Zimbabwe and China?
The relationship was strengthened by the fall of our relationship with countries in the West. This is where China started to emerge. And at the same time, if you look at China and this trajectory, it has always been developing itself to an extent that in the early 2000s and in the late 1990s, China decided to send out its companies to be able to win contracts, to be able to provide the so needed services. And the most desperate of countries are found in the African continent. And at the same time, as we also look at China and how President Xi Jinping at the present moment, he has been aggressive in terms of his foreign policy. We would also need to understand how China has managed to establish itself as a powerhouse through the BRICS association. That is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and also South Africa. But that form of integration has also grown beyond the 5 countries. This seems to be a common thread within a majority of African countries, that China has a non-interference policy of which we don't believe it exists. At the same time, whenever China is providing assistance, there are no stringent conditions, of which that is also hard to believe. And at the same time, China is offering us different gifts, for example, in the form of what we term palace diplomacy, where China is giving us buildings such as parliaments, the refurbishing of regional bodies such as the AU headquarters, the ECOWAS headquarters in West Africa, presidential palaces. It has even established what we call conspicuous institutions. These are institutions that actually teach Chinese culture, Chinese heritage. And I think in Zimbabwe we do have that at the University of Zimbabwe, where the Confucius Institution is actually teaching people Mandarin, that is Chinese language. This is what is the reality in terms of China establishing its relationships not only with Zimbabwe, but with the majority of African countries.
Thank you so much, Dr. Malinga. Now, looking at all these factors that you have spoken about, issues that you have addressed, what are the potential challenges and opportunities for the future of China-Zimbabwe relations?
I'll start off with the challenges. We are seeing that Zimbabwe is not necessarily benefiting a lot, especially from the mining ventures that China is undertaking in the country. At the same time, we are also seeing debt being one thing that we're also not taking into consideration, that at some point we might have a debt trap where we're not able to pay back the money that we're owing to China. And even some of the deals that are being done between the two countries, there's a need for urgency in terms of the people that negotiate these deals, so that our communities and the Zimbabwean citizens is able to benefit from such initiatives. But however, looking on the other side in terms of the positives, I think we are already exhibiting and seeing infrastructure development as one of the positives. We're also starting to see the generation of power in the country, where China has been heavily involved in that. But however, what we're saying is that we need to carefully consider the relationship that we have, so that it can be able to benefit both parties without one side benefiting the most as compared to the other side. At the present moment, it's not a 50-50 relationship, given that China is already benefiting immensely from the expropriation of our natural resources without really giving back, especially in terms of the communities where these resources are expropriated. Even where some of the communities that have been displaced, there have been no mechanisms that have been put in place to ensure that they relocate to better places. Even the mining ventures that China is doing, we're not seeing the refurbishment or the building of roads, any other necessary facilities
Well, thanks so much for that response on that. But also, still on that issue there, are these gifts that we are receiving as Zimbabweans, be it the Parliament of Zimbabwe and so on, being gifted by China, are these gifts for free?
These are gifts that are not free, so one or the other would have to pay for them as the country. That is why I was saying there is really nothing that you can say it is for free. And so because of this kind of dichotomous relationship that we have with China, what we are seeing is that it's accruing over time, especially in terms of getting back some of the money we have spent on the gifts. And if you remember quite well, some of these deals that are actually signed, China does not necessarily give us the money, but it can say, no, we're going to give you 200 million to refurbish the airport, but these are the conditionalities.
Yes, you've been joined by Korisi all the way from South Africa. Good morning to you, Korisi Ngwato.
Good morning, how are you? And I would love to ask Doctor this question. Do you think African leaders, when they negotiate with China, they negotiate in good faith, whereby they negotiate to benefit as well as China? Because we have seen at some points where a land can be used as a collateral to the failure to pay loan, where a port can be given to China if they can't repay the loan. Some people will say there's a new recolonization of Africa by China. But now the question is, are these negotiations done in good faith? Are they done at the interest of Africa? Are these people, are we not blaming China where the people, the chief negotiators of Africa are failing? Are these African leaders negotiating for the best interest of Africa or for their own interest?
Our leaders are not negotiating in good faith. I think what we have seen over time is the rent-seeking mentality that does exist within our leaders on the ideology that what is in it for me. This is where we have a huge challenge. And at the same time, whenever these deals or negotiations are being done, we are actually negotiating from a disadvantaged point where we are not bringing anything to the table. But however, in actual fact, we are bringing everything to the table, given that we do have the natural resources, we do have some of the key resources that China is looking for. And at the same time, we also are characterized by corruption, maladministration, misgovernance. These are just some of the attributes that we usually have, especially in relation to the operationalization of our government. And because of such attributes, you would find out that there is always a negotiation that takes place behind closed doors, which is meant to benefit a few at the expense of a majority. So I do concur with you, but there is really a need to reconsider and be able to bring experts, policy advisors, economists, natural resources experts who can actually be able to assist, especially in terms of agency. But it's so unfortunate that we have the politicians being the only ones that are able to negotiate at the expense of the majority, who continue to be confronted by these challenges of poverty, unemployment, economic decline, etc. It is very difficult when the operational environment does not bring about ethos such as transparency, such as accountability. At the end of the day, Zimbabweans are not privy to information, especially when it comes to these dealings that are being done by foreign powers such as China. We are not able to get information on how much is being poured in and how much is going to be distributed to certain sectors within the economy. So as long as a majority of these deals are not clear, it becomes very difficult for any Zimbabwean to know what the country is actually getting itself into. And maybe given our experience in this project and what we have come across, especially in countries like Zambia, where mining is also an activity that brings a lot to the economy. We're seeing that at some point, China is going beyond, especially in terms of ensuring that it benefits a lot from the expropriation of these natural resources, to an extent that even some of our leaders are doing backyard deals. They're doing behind-the-scenes deals where citizens wake up and find out that a certain mining company or a certain mine is now being run by the Chinese. And because of this, China has also grown beyond in terms of malinformation and disinformation, We are talking about the availability of technologies, but they come with a price, and that price also includes the twisting of information so that we are not able to get the correct information.
Thank you so much, Dr. Malinga, for joining us.
Myself, right?
And Nonhlanhla Mapigwa is bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode. For feedback, you can contact us on 263-777-470017. Don't forget to follow and like our social media pages.